Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Iinuma. Our company is Strategic Systems Group. We are a Los Angeles-based IT consulting firm and experts in enterprise resource planning. Our tagline is Transformation to the Intelligent Enterprise. I'm here today with my associate, Mike Rodriguez. He's a senior business consultant at Strategic Systems Group. And we have a topic that relates to how we got Baan, Infor Baan application to run on AWS. Okay, so maybe we talk a little bit about Baan briefly, and then talk a little bit about AWS. So maybe briefly, how would you describe Infor Baan?
Infor Baan is a enterprise resource planning application that's been around for at least 35 years, 40 years. It's very robust. They are on the one of the older versions, Baan 4C, and with many customizations and add-ons. The application is it's a very stable ERP application.
Okay, great, perfect. As far as AWS, I'm sure AWS is known to quite a number of people. For our purposes, how would you describe AWS?
AWS is Amazon's web services. It's a service that they provide for cloud computing. You would have your servers, applications up on their cloud service.
Also, specifically about the compliance issue. So, was there something that related to the function of the application, or something that related to security?
The compliance issue is actually an issue with the older OS, old Solaris OS. There are many security holes within the older application that can be taken advantage of by hacking or nefarious individuals that would like to gain access to their servers.
Okay, good. So I guess it's a common theme. So I guess as the OSs have been upgraded, that they close more and more of those loopholes. And it sounds like this particular implementation of the OS wasn't patched very well. Is that correct?
I believe it was patched. It's just that years ago they didn't have as much security built into the OS at that time that are now found to be very vulnerable to access.
Okay, good, pretty good. Okay, why don't we talk a little bit about how? So how did you do this? What was the first step?
Your OS that you're going to be on, which version of the OS, and which version of your relational database that you're going to be behind Baan. If you are changing databases, there's a few more steps, but if you're using the same database, let's say Oracle in this instance, you can pretty much just do the figure out what versions you want to run, and then you determine which porting set will support the OS and database.
So maybe specifically for this particular exercise, what was the OS and what was the database?
For this, in this instance, the database was Oracle 12.2, and the OS is Linux Red Hat release 6, I believe, 6 or 6.1.
Okay, so once you had those pieces in place, you had the OS and the relational database squared away, and then you had the porting set installed. What came next?
Once the porting set is installed, there are various ways of moving the application, but the most common would be to do a copy. However, depending on your OS, do a copy of the file structure of Baan from one server to the other. Placing it into the same location generally is the best idea. Once that is configured and moved over, you can then make a snapshot of your database and move that to the new instance in this instance, Oracle. And once those are in place, a few files, Baan configuration files that you need to set aside and make your adjustments to them so they will point to the correct new server and locations.
Yeah, it's really good. All right, so at this point in time, you've gone through the process of I guess, essentially lift and shift is sometimes how it's described, to take it off an on-premises server and essentially plop it into a cloud-based, web-based server. So you mentioned
Yes.
some configuration. So was there anything else before you got the thing to run?
The one step after, once you get everything configured, I mean, you do have to reinstall the porting set second time. That is one of the gotchas, because when you copy the files over, you do overwrite certain configurations that the porting set has done. At that point, as long as your permissions and on an operating system and your users are configured, the application is ready to start. You can pretty much start the application at that point. There are a few settings that you always miss a few settings when you're copying the files over. You just confirm that all your environment variables are set, and once those are set and your systems are communicating, when I'm saying your systems, I mean you can connect to your relational database if it's either on the existing server or if it's a tier 3 and sitting on a database server. As long as everything is connected and functioning, the application should start without any issues.
So once the application is running, is there any other configuration required to get people to use it?
The only other settings are users and printers.
Good.
Your users will need to be moved to your new database instance, and the OS will need to be configured for them, unless or your domain, depending on if you're changing domains.
Cool. Okay, then let's switch to the concept of business value. So once it was done, what did the client get out of this process?
The most important was they're compliant. That's the driving force behind the move, to get to a compliant OS. Second one, your bond is still supported even if it was on the older OS, but now your OS and your database are, because you're moving to a newer database version at this time. You get into a more current database, you get on a current OS, and like I said, the main was that they are now compliant with SOX.
Alrighty. This is a really good overview of how we got Bond to run on AWS. So do you have the expectation as a result of the work that you did that Infor might actually change the classification to say that, yes, this is supported?
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right.
Well, honestly, I don't think they will. They have their own cloud services.
Oh, okay, yes.
They will support to the point where, from what I've in this issue with these issues, working with web services and their add-on products, let's say like Bridge Logics and Vertex, they are willing to help until you get to the point where this may no longer be a bond issue. This may be an AWS issue.
Gotcha. All right. So in other words, they will support up until the point where that they have, I guess, quote unquote jurisdiction, and then once it goes beyond that, the client is essentially on their own.
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
It's a fairly simple, straightforward process. Time consuming, but straightforward.
Good. All right. So would it be okay if I switch to a little bit of Q&A? So I jotted down a couple of questions that other folks might have as well as they listen to this.
Okay.
So earlier you kind of mentioned a porting set. So in kind of very simplistic terms, what is a porting set?
The porting set are the executables and drivers between Bond, the OS, your client, and database. It's the tool set.
It sounds a little bit like a communications hub in a certain respects, that is kind of responsible for communication from the user interface to the application and then possibly to the database and back?
And yes, and the OS. Yes, it is their, it's their connecting tools.
Good, very good. Earlier, you mentioned something about a snapshot of a database. So again, in simplistic terms, what is a snapshot of a database?
It could be a backup, or depending on your database, you can take it offline and move the instance to a new location. So it's a point in time where your database is and where it has a good checkpoint and everything is in sync. Usually you do it after you shut down the application in the database to make sure everything's in a nice clean spot.
So there was something that you mentioned earlier about installing the porting set a second time. So why was that significant?
The initial porting set install, especially for the Windows environment, it sets up your registry settings. So since you're moving the application over and not doing an actual install, you need your registry and your base environment configured. And your tool set, installing the porting set will do that. Once that's been installed, you move the application over. But when you move the application over, you're overwriting parts of the porting set you just installed. So you need to go back and reinstall the porting set so you have the current versions of the tools.
Cool, understand. Finally, I think you mentioned tier 3, or maybe I interpret it as 3-tier. So it might be worth a little bit of explanation about what it means to be in a 3-tier environment.
Baan application is sitting on one server, and your database is on another server, and they communicate through the network. They're not on the same physical server.
And then we talk about the client application, which has the user interface. So in this environment, where would the client software be?
The client sits on the user's workstations.
Okay, very good. So in this scenario, it could be someone in an office in North Carolina, for example, communicating through the internet to the AWS application server, and then the AWS application server is talking to the database server also at AWS.
Correct.
Good. Could there have been another implementation where there was I guess maybe the equivalent of a remote desktop server?
Yeah, some clients do use the remote desktop client server.
Good. Okay, so in that implementation, essentially the remote desktop server, the application server, and the database server would all be on AWS?
Yes, that will work.
And then as far as the client is concerned, in the office in North Carolina, so what do they have on their system?
They have a heavy client sitting, and there also is a web-based client that would need to be configured on the OS to support it.
Okay, very good.
It uses it's a Java-based application.
Okay, very good. Now this is all interesting stuff. All right, Mike, this was very helpful. Hope the folks that are listening to this find it informative. Thanks a bunch for your time.